Welcome to What Matters to People, uncovering stories, trends, and connections that unlock greatness in brands.
Hi everyone, this is Steve Sowerby and welcome to What Matters to People. So this is a podcast where we really are looking at stories, trends, connections, learnings, inspiration that can unlock the greatness in brands and in the people who are building brands, who are of course the most important asset and resource that we have in organizations. So we're really pleased to be kicking off a brand new series titled Rethinking Life Stages. And this is all about exploring the different phases of life that can help us to reshape our marketing strategies towards our consumers, the people that we want to engage with. And those of you who have followed us will know how passionate we are about moving from the dinosaur age of demographics as a way of identifying people to more psychometrics and life stages in the way of identifying and connecting with people. Because unless we're able to connect with them emotionally, people won't care what we have to say. It's not important to them. So let me pass over to Dave, the person who really started me on this journey of insights and closeness to people some 35 years ago, Dave. Dave, over to you.
When we were both in school together 35 years ago.
I wish.
So welcome everybody to the new sessions. As Steve said, we sort of have a focus here of trying to understand what really matters to people. And in doing that, we started again the conversation we've had many times about the thought about life stages versus, let's say, generations. So maybe in one of the future podcasts, I'll explain a bit more why I personally discovered the Generation X is based on a myth, which was developed by the guy that wrote the book. And I was lucky enough to interview and talk to the guy that wrote the book just after he wrote it. And he was appalled that marketers thought it was this general guide to understanding young people. But what it did lead me down the path of over the years was developing and working with the idea that we all pass through 3, 4, 5, 6 life stages. Now, what they are, you're a kid, you're a teen, you're an independent young adult, you're in families, you're then older. And of course, my favorite subject in the last few years has been the fact that somewhere around 55, you become what we call a new life builder, somebody who maybe for the next 20 years is an independent or married or in a couple or in a relationship, but you're basically no longer kid focused. You're like, what am I going to do for the next 20 years? And then, of course, there's that last stage, which might be the last 5 to 10 years of your life when you really do have to start slowing down for different physical reasons. So what we plan to do with this series is invite some different experts, some different people with big opinions on marketing and targeting and thinking about people to help us understand the way they see this world. And we're really lucky because our first guest is Mark Earls. And Mark is somebody that I encountered, I won't embarrass him, years and years ago, reading some of his stuff, got to meet him a few times, heard him talk at different events, and he always adds real value in getting people to rethink people, basically, in the way people act and behave. Famous for some of his books, Heard, of course, is probably the first big famous one, I think, Mark. Copy, which is my favourite book that I recommend to young people in advertising to go and read. I don't think I've ever told you that before, but that is. And a lot of others. And so welcome, Mark. Maybe you want to give us the 30 seconds bio or whatever you want to say. Apart from don't just tell us about the band you play in, tell us about the rest of your life.
Okay. So first of which, like you, Dave, I've got a background in creative agencies. I was a planner for 20 odd years of my life. And that was that ended when I realised that I was entirely emotionally unsuited to being a senior executive in a large corporation. Yeah. So That was my private excuse. My public excuse was that, to be honest, this herd idea had come up, and I realised that the advertising industry, was dead set for one-to-one communication as the ultimate goal, aided and abetted by technology and technologists and accountants, and ignoring entirely what social science was telling us. So I set out my own to do the herd thing, and that's what I've been doing since. And I advise companies, I write books, I do talks. I mentor quite a lot of people, because I think that one of the most important things that life stage, topical here, one of the most important things that we get to do as we get older is to give away our power. Mm-hmm. Us three elderly gentlemen are not going to solve the great problems on the planet, but we can give people the tools to do it. Yeah. And I think I spend a lot of time doing that, because I think that's very important.
I think that's a great thought, and I know that. Well, Steve and I, in our own ways, try to do it. We mentor. I do a lot of coaching at universities and things like that. And you're right. We won't solve the problem, but I think sometimes what amazes me, Mark, is I come across people like you and Steve that got lots and lots of experience that are reticent to share, and that always really. It does anger me in a sense. The way we can move things on is by just learning, and it's cumulative. You don't rediscover stuff all the time, right? You've got to copy is exactly the thing, the essence of your book. Go out. I always love when people say, "What's that book about?" I'll say, "Well, the basic essence is if you think you're going to discover something totally new, you're a dummy. Just go and." Find ideas.
Time and the effort doing that, right?
Right. Yes.
Just find a solution to the problem that's already been created, and see if it'll apply and give new light on your.
Tweak it, make it better, refine it, do something with it. Yeah, exactly.
There's a phrase we use in our workshops, which is "copy with pride."
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I just say Elvis was a big fat copycat, but he was still the king of rock and roll.
Yes, that's really true.
That's true. He just had better hip movements.
Yeah,
he did. No, he stole that. I don't know if you realise that, Dave, but Elvis stole the hip movements, got him banned from mainstream TV in the US and in various places around the world. He stole it from an act that he and the boys had supported, called Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys, supported on the sort of Mississippi Delta circuit, and actually in Vegas the last time. And Freddie would slow down as their final number, slow down to halftime. Really, is a comic song.
Yeah,
the Hound Dog, which was already been a sort of genre hit before. And Freddie would start swinging these hips, and Elvis and the guys thought this would be great, and so Elvis then took it on and made it his hallmark and made himself famous.
And see, but isn't that the classic example of that things just follow each other, right? You just use it and go with it, right?
Yeah.
So I know we'd swap notes and everything about, the thoughts that Steve and I have, etc. I'd love to just start off with, can you go back and just explain people the thought behind herd and how that might apply as we think about this thing about, we go through life stages. So what does that actually mean?
Yeah. Okay. So this was prompted by a sort of increasing feeling of dissatisfaction with this obsession with one-to-one marketing, which was, like I mentioned at the top, was seen to be the goal. That would be the holy ground if we could only capture that. Then advertising and marketing would suddenly be super efficient. And I just felt uncomfortable with it. And it was partly because I was working with a lot of people from different cultures, from Thailand, from Sub-Saharan Africa, from Latin America, from Scandinavia, and they were all better educated than me, to be honest, and they would and very polite people. But there was something they weren't telling me. They knew how to play the marketing game and do all the things that we asked them to do, and they were very good at that. But there was something missing, and I didn't know quite what it was. And then one of my mentors, Wendy Gordon, who is a researcher who sadly passed away last year, who is one of the most inventive people in our world that's ever been. She and Ginny Valentine did a paper at the Market Research Society, and this is 2000, and it was called The 21st Century Consumer. And I thought, this is great. Darn, this is great. Mm-hmm. This is great. I'm really resentful because she spelt out a lot of things I've been working on. But the one thing she hadn't looked at was the. She'd still assumed that individuals were the sort of the locus of attention, granularity. And so I said, what if, let's just start with the what if and go, maybe these other cultures that I'm spending time in and interacting with, maybe they're the ones who are right and we're the ones who are wrong.
Yeah.
You know, when you swim in, when you're humans that live in a culture, it's like fish in water. You don't see it. It's just it's just how the world is, right?
Yeah, right.
And so the individualism that characterizes so much of North European and therefore North American and Australian, because as we know, Australia and the UK are on the same dimension out there.
We're either the 51st state or the county of England.
I'm afraid. I didn't want to be rude, but there we are. Not that we have anything to be proud of. Yes, so that maybe we're the ones who are wrong. Maybe the majority of the planet have a better fix on who we are. You know, in sub-Saharan Africa, Mandela and Tutu had pulled together the post-apartheid world using this idea of Ubuntu, a mutuality, that my success depends on your success.
Yep.
Yeah.
That you see people as part of a network, not as individual grains of sand of humanity. Yeah. And I think that was a really big sort of flair for me. Equally, working in Latin cultures, it's quite clear that society matters. It is your family, it is your group, it is your town, it's part of town. That's really, really important. And we sort of figured this out because of our... So that led me off. And I started just thinking, what if? And I started, to be honest, looking at, so what would we count? What would we measure? How would we begin to do things differently? And given the importance of research, market research in particular, to shaping the decisions that marketers make and that business makes, what if we could count this differently? And so that's where it went. And I started to see it everywhere, like you do when you've just bought a new car. You see the same car everywhere, right? It's the same thing. So I started to see it everywhere, and it became a really rich and fertile territory. And then I met a number of academics who were able to provide further shape on it. And I collaborated in a subsequent book with Professor Alex Bentley, who now teaches at the University of University of Tennessee in, where is he now? I'll give him the city. Anyway, University of Tennessee. And he and a couple of other guys who are anthropologists and archaeologists, so very different disciplines from the ones, the cognitive psych folk who had come in to shape how market research thinks. These guys were able to look at data and say, is someone acting independently or are they doing it based on what other people are doing? Right. And we used some of their work and reapplied it. And we created this very simple 4-box thing that lies at the heart of both I'll have what she's having in the book and then copy. Yeah. And I use it all the time with my clients. It's a really simple sorting tool. Yeah. You can use it, use it in a very detailed way and do analytics on it, but it's just a really useful sort of tool. Are we doing something that people are choosing independently, or are they choosing on the basis of what other people are doing? Yeah. And that's the hard. Yeah. Because if they are social creatures living their lives mostly as in reaction to other people and in real or imagined, remembered or otherwise, if that's how they live their lives, then this is the area we need to look at. And there's a whole bunch of understanding techniques we can do and follow it through. And then equally, if they're not, that's interesting. And that's where more of the cog psych applies. Yeah,
it's interesting, as you talk it through, Mark. Late 90s, I moved from Sydney to Bangkok. Steve becomes one of my clients. I then spend nearly coming up for 30 years living in different parts of Asia, working around the world. But one of the things that really struck me very early on when I first moved to Asia, and I was given my first job, was trying to get Coca-Cola mandates from Atlanta to make sense in terms of developing advertising across a dozen Asian countries. Mm-hmm. And while there was a basic human element to the Coca-Cola message that would be true everywhere, you had to find what made sense and why it was different, and why it would work in India. How to make it work in India is different from how it might work in Bangkok, where I lived, or here in Hong Kong, and where I am at today, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I quickly came to, and this is where Steve and I connected I guess, 98 or something like that, when we were working together, was this sense that what matters to people is what really matters. And the too many marketers, as you say, are focused on other stuff and not really getting to understand in the context of a culture, of a market, of a life stage. And this is where, for example, I discovered by thinking that way that I looked at teen studies going back 30 years. Now, back at home in my apartment, I've got these now going back 70 years from all over the world, right? And what I've discovered is there's more in common than different.
Yeah.
The specific pop star of the day will be different, right? Whether they wear jeans or baggy pants or whatever is different. But the sense of what they need and what they're looking for, etc., basically stays. And then what happens is figuring out, well, why is that true? Well, maybe it's because what matters at that age group is to be part of the mood, part of the groove, part of what's hip or hop or whatever the terminology of the day is, right? And so that herd factor, and I remember when I first encountered your book, it was sort of like, it's almost like a stamp of approval sort of thing. Oh, yeah, somebody else thinks like that. And off you go.
Yeah. But it's also true. And again, copying with pride, Mark, I think the concept of herd is really powerful, but it's not just one big definition of a herd. There are herds within herds. You know? And sometimes when we don't have that connection, and we find that often when we go on holiday and you hear a local accent from your hometown or from your country, all of a sudden you connect with that person from, so there is that herd of maybe national culture, but then within cultures, there are distinctive herds, perhaps even, as we're going to be talking about, between life stages. Yes. And in other cases, it could be between different sort of consumer groups, for example. If I'm sort of looking at a particular brand, that might have created a herd around it, which is very loyal to that particular brand. And we also use the concept, by the way, copy with pride in leadership training by creating a herd of the leadership team in organizations so that they learn to trust each other and really work with each other and develop a relationship with each other.
This is brilliant. And I'm just going to pick up something that occurred to me as Dave was talking, which you've pointed out right now. The notion of leadership is so culturally shaped.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean there are different versions, there are different variants on basically an American individualist model. But just when we think about it in the Anglosphere, we think about it as the individual who's heroic, who overcomes, and it's a very simple Joseph Campbell hero's journey kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's just really both untrue, unrealistic, and unhelpful if you're trying to lead organizations that are not built of entirely Anglo-Saxon cultural products, right?
When this really came home to me just in the last 2 weeks, I was reading an article, and I do not remember who wrote this. It was an article on LinkedIn, and somebody was writing an article about a particular big Japanese company, and why it was that company succeeded in getting around a big trouble and not having to get rid of a whole lot of its staff and stuff. And it highlighted the fact, which if you've lived in Japan, as I have, everybody knows, and actually I was part of it one time, when a Japanese company gets into trouble, instead of laying off people, what happens is the first thing is all the management takes 50% pay cuts until the company's out of trouble. Now, sometimes you have to do other stuff as well, but it's that thing of, no, we're the ones that must sacrifice first, right? Yeah. Which this article was sort of, it was almost like this is appalling news. Like, how could, and you go, no, but in that culture, that's what leadership is about.
Totally.
Self-sacrifice first, right?
I think that's exactly right. And so understanding the differences in culture is one thing, but I want to just emphasize here, I think, despite being a product of Anglo-Saxon culture myself, I think that we need to recognize that that the rest of the world isn't like that. They're not just the sort of flavored variants of that. The rest of the world comes from very different places. Some things we have in common, some things we don't. and on a lot of things. When we look at marketing and the practices of marketing and market research, we need to see them as cultural products of the Anglo-Saxon individualist culture as well, and not take them as given. Because anytime you take something for given, I think the more we realise about how human behaviour really works, and how to understand it better, the more likely you are to trip yourself up.
Yeah.
Look, listen, I know we've all worked in lots of countries, right? And I'm sure, Mark, you must have, that first time when you were working on a project in a non-Anglo market, and you were doing focus groups, and somebody finally was brave enough to ask you the question, why do you do focus groups? And quite often, and having done them in many, many countries, the argument is, well, in some countries, you just got to push and pull people a bit further to get them to speak up, and you go, have you ever thought about the fact that in this culture, maybe that's just a bad way to do stuff, that asking 5 strangers to sit in a room and talk about stuff just isn't going to work, which sort of leads me to my next question, or our next question to you, which is, you talked about your battle with this desire for, to individualize every piece of communication, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, your recognition that maybe the herd is the thing that really matters. So what do you do to, I don't know, get people to understand the imbalance between those two things?
So, very good question, and it's really practical. So rather than draw a description of your target audience as who lives on their own, you seek to describe a connection of people, a network you might call it, or a group or a tribe, and you understand that group. That's what you do. That's the first thing. You understand that group, how they interact with each other, not just how they are connected to each other as static, how they interact with each other, how stuff goes around the group, what stuff stays the same, and how there's mechanisms that keep it in place. And what are the things that change, and how do those things change? And you need to look at it both in the shorter term and ideally in the longer term as well. And some of it will come from extrapolating cultural studies, academic stuff, and some of it will come from your in-depth knowledge of that country and how things are changing it.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have to do that. And it doesn't matter which part of the population you look at, in which country, you have to understand the social world in which they live. First and foremost.
Yes.
Yeah. And Mark, that leads me to obviously a very actual question, which is, last 4 years have been, in my lifetime, the most uncertain, in terms of the changes around the world around us, with COVID starting everything off, and then we have the geopolitical issues and wars across significant countries, and economic issues, and sustainability is now starting to hit. We're hitting 40 degrees regularly here in Thailand. How do you think this uncertainty is impacting herd mentality? Is it causing us to be even stronger, even more connected, or actually even more individualistic and looking after ourselves? Have you got some experience?
I've got a couple of thoughts on that. So the first thing is that to say that let's just bear in mind that these changes have been a long time coming. I'm one of the premise of my new book, which we'll talk about a bit later, is that this was a moment of discontinuity and dislocation. That the pandemic represents that, in which a number of historical trends have been filtered.
Right.
So that, and like a lot of things, I've slightly excused the ponciness of it, but a Hegelian view of history is mine, in that events happen and we make sense of them afterwards.
Yeah.
They're disruptive moments rather than continuous flows of trends, as the trends monkeys always describe it. So I think that's the first thing to observe. And within that, then, we can see mechanisms that people are using which keep things as they are, which pull the group tighter together. And that's what we call in our work. It's a form of social learning called tight copying. That's what we call it. So when you're copying really closely and precisely what other people precisely do. And quite often there's a hierarchical thing there. So you're looking at people who are in positions of power or knowledge, cultural value. And so you're actually creating some kind of coherence there.
Right.
And people quite happily cohere their identities and their behaviors in a very polarized way from other people when you copy really closely. There's a game that I don't know, Dave, you must have seen me play this game with people before where you get it's based on the movie The Bodyguard, where you get a bodyguard between two people, and one is the assassin and one is the potential victim, and the bodyguard has to get as close as they can to the victim, and the bodyguard is between them. So that's the assassin, bodyguard. Now, that works quite well with just two of them. When there's lots of people doing the same thing and doing tight copy, they very quickly put themselves into a corner. A whole group, because you're all copying really closely. It's a physical manifestation of the maths of that. Now, the other side of things is loose copying, which tends to be characterize things like haircuts, fashion, music, soft drinks, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. That tends to go that way. It's very high churn of popularity over time, high frequency, blah, blah, and it's based on people saying, what's popular right now? Right. So popularity is the metric as opposed to what the group is doing. Right. Generally it's done, and this is how we do it around here. So two very different ways, and clearly there are other ways of doing social link. Those two, the two big chunks of it. The second thing, the loose copying allows things to whiz through populations, and partly enabled by the technology that is in every part of our lives. So stories can come and go, behaviours can come and go right through the population and spread like that. Of course, most things don't, despite what those who are trying to sell us memes and social media communication will tend to say that you just need to get it viral. Most things don't spread. Yeah. So that's, but that's how they do spread. There's lots of noise, whereas this side is stasis. It's more of the same. And in fact, you get some of those classic old social psychology tropes are quite good at explaining what goes on in there, that because you're only hearing in your other people who agree with you and you're an echo chamber, you become more and more extreme in the views or the behavior. So you get the risky shift is a classic one here. So you more and more extreme. And the identity, the group identity and the belonging to that group becomes so much more important that actually, in the end, you have a bucket of beliefs and a bucket of behaviors which you just buy into the whole thing. Right. You don't. It's not a question of whether you've reasoned any of these. You just go, this is who we are. Yeah, absolutely we are. And I think that represents this type copy thing represents a lot of what we see in the mainstream of Western politics right now. There's a lot of encampment and very polarized positions. Yeah. But at the same time, we got a lot of this over here. We got a lot of stuff coming and going, and just we might call it clickbait journalism, but it's just a lot of noise, a lot of froth. Yeah. So I think that maybe that model helps explain some of what we see in the world, both politically and in terms of the other behavior that we see, people becoming more focused on their home lives, people being willing to go back to the office. Yeah. In the way that American leaders would like them to, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there is that. I mean, one of the things that, as Steve, we all know, the last 4 years have been a weird sort of time in our lives, and in the last 60 years roughly that we've all been alive. But one of the things about this whole, the work from home thing is a great example of that. To your point, it was a meme that, and then it became, oh no, it's supposed to be that hard and fast rule now that, that's going to be the norm and everybody's going to do that. And I know probably you did, but, I got to advise or work for some companies who were trying to understand where they were supposed to sit with this. And one of the things that really struck me as I continued to talk to lots of people across lots of countries throughout COVID and then in the year or so after COVID was the weird things that they would talk about. I mean, I was shocked to find out that the one thing when people were working from home, they missed commuting more than anything else. And why? Because commuting was the ultimate third place, right? It's the ultimate downtime. It's me time. It's non-interference time, right? Yeah. And what really struck me then was that there had been this sort of automatic, well, we must be black and white. We must be pro working from home because that's what as I'm sitting at home watching the media, that's what it's telling us. But then there's an awful lot of stuff in most people's lives that's going on about, you know what, it's okay for me to have a talk with Mark and Steve on a Zoom call now and again, but wouldn't it be much better if we just sat in the coffee room at a break and swap stories, right?
Yeah.
And that was a real shift in my own thinking about, again, what really matters to people. What mattered about work really was the things that we sort of always thought they either disliked or were peripheral, but actually it's sort of the stuff you miss, right? And that's the socialization. It's the me times.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's one of the things that really I have and many people that I work with have difficulty in is that they see the behaviors, they hear what people say, but then that's not particularly useful because everyone else, all of your competitors see and hear what people are saying and doing. And many times we just react to that with our communication and say, well, you say this, here you are. Whereas what's really important is how do they think and what's important to them in terms of their values. Do you have any sort of tips or techniques how we can get down to the values of a herd rather than just reacting to the behaviors of a herd?
Well, I think that's a very good question. So if I were to paraphrase it, to say, how do you get right down to the stuff that's important as opposed to the noise in the data?
Exactly.
There's always going to be noise in the data. And one of the things that we as an industry and as an Anglophone culture have as a problem is our love of novelty. And so the noise is the bit that we pay attention to. What's new?
Yes.
What's new? What's exciting? What's new? Tell me something new. Don't tell me, Dave, that they're all the same, that teenagers, because that's really boring. So tell me something new, Dave, about teenagers. Really? I mean, I think that's a real problem that we've got. And it's a cultural issue rather than a physiological or a psychological issue. It's a cultural issue, and we need to head off for that. I think that's the first thing. I think that in most things, I default to helping people draw a better map of the people.
Okay.
Having my clients have a map that works for them. And I don't want to have the perfect map. I want to have a usable map that's going to help them on whatever, extending the narrative using the J word, but the journey, whatever journey they're on. Right. A map, right? It's not the territory, it's a map that we can use to navigate the world. And that has got to start with not what matters to you in the organization, but what matters to the people in your organization, your vendors, your partners, your media influencers, and your customers, fundamentally. What matters to your customers?
Yeah.
And so that map is really, really useful. And I've stolen a couple of things over the years from different places. One of the ones that I find most useful right now, because I've used it a lot in B2B context and stakeholder analysis, is the jobs to be done framework, which is something that Clay Christensen adopted. And the reason why I find it really useful is that it doesn't look to characterize an individual with a psychological. It says, what are they trying to do? What's their aim here?
Aim in life,
yeah, exactly. So what's their job to be done, and how can we help them do that, rather than having we tell them something, get them to do the thing that we want them to do?
Yeah,
it's a very different perspective, right? And it's for me, it lands much closer to this notion of what matters to people as being your starting point.
Yeah. And the idea is like, how can we help them to get to where they want to be? And must be humble enough to realize that just selling them our product isn't going to be good enough. Our product, whatever it might be, or service, is only one piece of a puzzle of solutions that really can help them to get to where they want to be. And different herds will have different needs in terms of the solutions, of course.
And if you buy my analysis that many of the decisions we make, if not most of the decisions we make, are made under the influence or in response to other people, then the thing's only at best secondary.
Yeah.
And that's not something that anyone wants to hear who's working on developing a product and improving a product and creating the product. But it's the truth, is that people out there are mostly doing stuff in response to other people and to serve their idea of what other people imagine they should be doing and so on. That's the reality of human life, and it's brilliant.
Yes.
rather than it's somehow faulty because it's failing to take economic responsibility for judging value created by manufacturers. It's how it is. And if you start from that point of view, I think that's a really great place to start.
Yeah.
That people are amazing. They do stuff. Give me an example. I just finishing off a paper for the Royal Mail in the UK in their media business. And we're looking at that bit of customer journeys, which, as Google rightly observe, has been revealed by digital e-commerce. So we've seen a lot more about what they call the messy middle.
Right.
And there are lots of, there's lots of ways in which that people don't have a neat procession from awareness to purchase. It's just not like that most of the time for most people.
It's all over. Yeah.
Yeah, as Fiona Blades and Steve Phillips put it a few years ago, it's more like snakes and ladders than it is like a ladder or a funnel. Now, if that's the case, your job as a marketer is to help people through from awareness through to help them, not make them, because you can't help them. What are the barriers they feel? How hard is it to make a decision online about a pair of curtains?
Yeah.
Quite hard, right?
Yeah.
You can see the color, you can see, and how do you make it easier for them? I haven't even got tape measure here. Where's the tape measure? And how much bigger does it need to? I don't know. You make it easy for them. Make it easy. Get them take a photograph of the windows, and they can load up and see what the curtains look like in the color, and that's so all that stuff you can do technologically, but we can also do clearly with mail, which I'm arguing the mail can help a lot in this space. But that's an example of the role of marketers being different from the one we assume it is, coming from the 1950s in the Midwest of the USA, which is where most marketing tools come from, right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty exciting because it's suddenly, for us, it's a really rich place to look to. And I think it's a very liberating space for people who then get to execute.
Exactly.
And I think it's more profitable, in my experience, that you help customers, the customers return again and again, and more customers will come with them.
It's true. It's true. Have you got a brand in mind? These people did a great job in helping people along this journey, and it was successful for them. Just something that maybe immediately comes to mind.
So there are one obvious one, Land Rover. I'm a big fan of. Generally, I worked with them years ago when I was on the agency side, and I've owned several. And there's a great thing for the launch of the new Defender, which is, for my mind, it's a bit of a ghetto battleship, but it's lovely design, and I'm sure it's brilliant. But what they did was they identified there were moments where people might have seen it in and around a showroom but not got into it.
Right.
And so they knew that once people got into it, their view of the experience was so different, and all the rest of the marketing activity could work. The advertising, the point of sale, the price promotional stuff, email contact, and the dealer experience, all of that, to get people into the. And so they created a little mail piece with something that you had a button on it. You turned the car to this degree, and that activated an invite to sit in the car.
Yeah.
So 45 degrees is a really steep angle to have a car being able to stand on and then drive upwards. It's really quite extraordinary, right? And that's what the Defender can do. So and goodness sake, all these people in suburban London, North London, are not going to be taking their Defender at 45 degrees ever.
Where in the UK can you drive at a 45-degree angle?
Eastnell Castle, which is the home of the SAS and Land Rover outdoor activities.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I asked. That was sarcastic Aussie. Sorry.
I know. I know. It's silly, isn't it? But so that's an example, right? So you intervene to solve a particular problem, knowing that the rest of it is obvious and good and sensible and well crafted, but it's combining both something, a real understanding of what switches the customer to someone who might consider this and actually look at the more engage with the detail of a purchase. This is this product feature and getting them into.
Yeah. Good example.
Yeah. Dave, I think you had a question.
I've got one question, right, which we have to ask, because over the last few months, I've noticed that all of your activity seems to be about time travel.
Yes.
So can you give us the potted diagram of what this is all about and why suddenly you're the master of time travel?
Oh, I am a Time Lord, I think you'll find out.
Time Lord. Thank you. Yes.
So what it is very much as we've been talking about, there was this discontinuity 4 or 5 years ago, the run up to pandemic and then the pandemic itself. It was a major social deprivation experiment, which made us rethink a whole bunch of stuff, like, how we work, how we live, what we want from work and life, how we love, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that has occurred to people that I have been looking at and working with and really stuck out for me is the thing about time, and particularly clock time, which is an Anglo-Saxon idea that we've embedded in it's built the modern world. It's built factories. It's built railways. Without clocks, you don't have railways. It's built our notion of productivity and economic value creation. It's also created a bunch of moral assumptions. If you aren't productive, what kind of lazy, no good so-and-so are you? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is you can see that in the colonialist judgment of people from other cultures who do things at different speeds or do multiple things at the same time. It's just very. Yeah. It's very interesting, clock time, but it's also, clock time, wherever the digital technology, which has embedded clocks in every aspect of our lives. Literally, my refrigerator's got clocks and it speaks to my phone. It's just stupid. My heating system has got a clock in it that's connected to my phone. But we can, so we can measure our exercise, the amount we sleep, the amount how we love making, all of that stuff. We can measure all that on the clock time. And the one thing it does, wherever the technology reaches, it gives us time poverty. Time poverty damages our mental health, our physical health. It damages our relationships, but most of all, it makes us dumb. Making decisions under time pressure is really bad. If you do it once, you know that you make bad decisions then. You do it repeatedly under repeated time pressures, the quality of your decision making goes down and down and down and down and down. That's where we are. And we all get told, let's squeeze a bit more out of this. Let's get a bit more efficiency out of this. Let's get a bit more productivity out. And we can do. I can probably do this a bit. Can fit this into my schedule, and we do a bit more of this, and we take 10 people out of the head count of here, and we can still do the same amount of work as we did before, probably a bit more if we reorganise people. It's just nonsense, right? With a limit to how much it can help us. It so happens this very Anglo-Saxon idea of clock time, 250 years dominated our world, done so much good. It's not the only way of thinking about time. Mm-hmm. There are many other ways of thinking about time. I was reminded this a few years ago, and I was doing a thing for a keynote for a conference in Mumbai. And there's very, very, as ever in India, I'm embarrassed by the articulate, educated, and sophisticated comments of the people who present these things. They're fantastic. And he said to me, "Mark, how is your Urdu?" And I said, "Not very good at all, really. I know a few words. Is Jaldi Urdu, is that Hindi? I'm not sure." He said, in Urdu, and as it turns out in Hindi as well, the word for yesterday is the same as the word for tomorrow. Mm. He says, and this captures our essential view on time, which is that it's circular and it just goes round and round, and so there's that. And I just realised, oh goodness, I've got the future, past, present, is in a line. And it's not like
everything's linear, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not, right?
It's a continuum. It's a continuum, yeah.
It's a continuum, but it can go round and round. It can circle. Yes. Another view of it is in many Aboriginal Australian tribal cultures have the notion of dream time, or some version of that, which is the part of the ancestors, which is happening right now in this landscape, in this same landscape as the things that are happening now.
Yeah.
All time is happening at once. It's all playing out at the same time.
It's all parallel lives.
Really, exactly. Which is really, I think, really powerful. In late imperial China, there was a fashion for having European-style ancestor portraits. Many cultures have ancestor worship, but the curious thing about this period was that should the descendant of the ancestor achieve some kind of merit, some status, reward, become a general or whatever, their marks of merit, of achievement, would be placed on the ancestors' portrait.
Yeah.
So your activity today will affect the past.
Yeah.
It's just very different. You know,
Yeah.
and as you both guys know, from Bangkok in Thailand, as a culture, is very present focused. It's time orientation. It's very, very present. And if you get people draw a map of the past, the present, the future, the present is really big. And there's lots of reasons to explain that, but just how it is. You look at the US, the home of this idea of a new career in a new town. I can just move west and start again. The past is nothing to me.
Yeah.
It's very different.
It's very different.
And so their idea of, when you ask an American about future, and I just at IIEX in Austin, it's just interesting. You chuck something over your shoulder and you hit 3 or 4 futurists now in Stockholm.
Yes.
And it's a bit like that Spartacus movie. No, I'm a futurist. No, I'm a futurist.
Yeah.
And because that's what American culture wants that. But has it made any difference?
Yeah.
Is it make any difference to having these things? I think not, because here's one thing you could do about the future. 2 things you do about the future. 3 things you can do about the future. 1, stop thinking about the future. It's not like we're not bookmakers trying to predict who is going to be right about the future. It's not about describing. That's something that maybe the insights world needs to move on from. It's not about describing the future and picking the winner. We should be helping people to prepare for lots of different futures. Prepare, don't predict, is my feeling. That's my little motto about this. And I built huge games for different organizations to help them explore lots of scenarios quickly, but not so that they can have the detailed scenario planning version of each scenario. I'm talking 20 scenarios in a day.
Right.
But so that they can work out what the big impact of this is going to be on their business and their business processes. And secondly, work out how they can start to mitigate for that. What do they need to do this week, this month, this year to start to prepare for that? So that's the future. Many and prepare. Past is in a whole other kettle of fish. And I think this is a really interesting space that the American led thinking about the future is missing entirely. The past shapes us in more ways than we imagine. You don't have to come from a very traditional, backward-looking culture to think about this, but we learn things when we were kids about who we are and how we relate to the world. This is perhaps a life stage observation.
Yeah.
And those things stay with us. They're part of our map of how the world is. And through various decisions we make, they either get reinforced or changed. But those things we learn early on. And that's why there are so many therapists in the world, is I think to help us understand whether these things we thought we learned when we were younger, are true or not. Maybe my dad didn't fail to love me. Maybe he was just busy trying to do his best. Maybe that's it. And so once you check and I've used this with corporations to help them understand the past they think they have and where it's anchored, and say, was it really that? Because once you release it, you release the story they tell themselves about who they are, the future suddenly opens up. And there's a huge opportunity for doing stuff. So the past is really important. There's another thing which I'll just say Maginot Lines. And next time I speak to you, Dave, please remind me to talk about Maginot Lines, which is the line of fortresses up the eastern side of France, which supposedly was going to the Germans invading in 1930s, but didn't, clearly. And then there's the present, right? Yeah. It's of the 3 questions in strategy, it's the least exercised. We're all really keen to go, where we want to go, how are we going to get there? That's the cool, sexy bits. No one wants to spend time going, so where actually are we now?
Mm. Yeah.
Where do we think we are? And just by taking the same multiple routes, so where did this person think about, this person? You don't have to get consensus to go, so if that's where we start from, if A is where we start from, as opposed to C, what will be the implications of that? Let's just work through that, and let's take it on board that it could be that. I found myself in New York recently, and a meeting cancelled, and I went to the Museum of Modern Art, and they had the collection of Matisse bronzes which are a progression of heads from a very realistic one of Jeannette, his model and muse, to a very cubist one, and he did them over the course of 6 years. Mm-hmm. And they became more and more. He said each of these as in a different way into the soul of this person.
Right. Yeah.
And we should remember that. It's not just the start's really obvious. We need to know where we are. And on a daily basis, to be honest, as we spend our lives on Zooms and Teams and all of that, too much of it, I like to spend time talking about how people are, where they think they are. And I've got lots of things that we can do to help people understand each other's timelines. But I think here's a simple one, right? I did a project, did a lot of work with them and with Experian over the last decade or so, and they're really lovely people. They've got this credit data thing, but basically data stuff. And one of the senior clients I was working with there, not a marketing person at all, we were doing this project, a sort of a innovation leadership program, and one of my team just clashed with her completely like this. And it was sort of styles, but it wasn't, and it resulted in both of them being in tears, which I hated. So took them both aside and I focused on the client and spent a couple of hours talking to her about her stuff. And it was only then that I really realized her, and perhaps this is back to jobs to be done, her timeline is, I'm a 50-something female executive. I've not reached the top of the company. This is probably going to be my last job. I've got a disabled son and a husband who is unable to do any full-time work. I'm the breadwinner. My son is going to need full-time care. My family doesn't live very long. I'm the person who has to do this. I'm not going to do anything that puts my job and my income and my ability to care for my son at risk. Now, clearly she didn't spell it out all just like that, but that's what I gained from her and listening really carefully to her. Now, that means don't make her feel that don't push against anything that she feels safe with.
Yeah. Don't put her at real risk because she's going to resist. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's her timeline. She sees the past is gone and this is the future. Her future is going to be her gone and has problem. So that's what she's thinking about. Make sure that the risk and fear stuff never gets activated.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, Mark.
So much of what you said, is so great. One thing that really I'll pick up on is when you said about the present and talking to people inside organisations individually about where do you think we are, or where do you think you are as a company, or where do you think your brand is. And it always amazes me that if you do it in a genuine way, first of all, you're going to find if you ask 10 people, you're probably going to get 8 different answers.
Yeah.
And then secondly, what you really get into is what matters to them as individuals.
Yes. Yeah.
And the pathway or the map that you can develop really is a reflection of what's going to make them feel good and safe about where to go, right?
Totally.
So that's really interesting. I will say one other thing. As you've been talking, I'm reminded that for some weird reason, in the last 2 months, my Facebook, LinkedIn, discourse feeds are all full of American little videos trying to sell courses in how to resolve procrastination. And I rant and rave because I have been taught, and to your point about learning from cultures, I was taught by somebody in Taiwan about 25 years ago that he didn't use the word procrastination, but he literally meant that was a good thing. And it was a good thing because you should never, ever, ever not take your time to think things through.
Yeah.
You should always avoid making it. He said, look, you should always avoid making a decision because the chances are that the thing you're trying to decide about will change tomorrow. And, new information, new circumstance. And so leave it until procrastinate, put it off, wait. And he actually explained that's true efficiency is waiting, right? And it's sort of interesting as you said that because I'm just reminded this stuff, for some reason, it's like all over my internet at the moment. It's like it's driving me crazy, right? So
some people would say you're attracting it from the universe, but I don't
think maybe, it is. No. It is because I have reacted to it, and then the algorithm is saying, this guy,
Pump it in.
It's a really good example of how, when we think about how we how we want to live, how we want to work, how we want to love, how we want the whole of our lives now. And it's not just us gents in the sort of the latter bits of our careers. I think it's everybody's thinking through this as well. And some of them are more confused than we are. The number one thing for me that helps unlock a whole series of new potentials is rethinking time. Yeah. Putting the clock time stuff away and the tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Yeah. Just saying that just makes me feel anxious, right? And that's what it's meant to.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really good advice. And that's what we don't do enough in marketing. We're just driven by timelines and having to deliver by a certain point, and therefore we jump to conclusions and we just do the obvious and don't really think. I love this idea of really spend time to think about where you are now, right? That is really something you can influence much more than you can influence a future 3 years from now. Very, very difficult to do. Mark, just final question from my side. Top 3 things that you would advise your marketers to do now as a result of some of the thoughts and conversations we've just had. What comes to mind as maybe the top 3 insights or hints or tips that you would say, guys, here are things that you need to be thinking about and doing in order to connect with people?
Yeah, the first of which is do a bit of triage. There's the difference between independent choices and social choices. Just look at the data and it'll tell you really quickly what kind of thing you've got going here. If you know what kind of thing, then you can ask better questions. You know, in emergency rooms, they don't go, let's work out precisely what the problem is. That's left for the likes of House to do his expert stuff. You need to go, what kind of thing is this? And so do that quickly and do it well. And then you can ask better questions and your study goes from there. The second thing is, to be honest, is to understand the world of the people in which you live. And I don't just mean the artifacts that populate that world, though that's interesting, because that's how we used to do it back in the day, but to understand the social world in which people live. And describe that social world, and that's what you're really marketing to, and it's the space between people. So you need to understand that, how stuff works within there, who people look to, who they don't look to, how has that happened in the past, and that's a second thing. And I think the third thing is don't be prissy about it. I am a great believer in doing good quality research. I also am a great believer in doing rough and ready research. So I'm sure you guys have done similar things, but I would make sure that my clients come face to face with the realities of their audience. I did a lot of interesting projects over about 5 years with a American business, who were trying to crack their consumer offering in India. And one of these times, the leadership team thought, here you go, we've heard about this, what Mark does. It's in a darkened room, and there's lots of Post-its and cards and stuff, and there's games, and it's going to be, that's good. So we'll just take our laptops down and a pen, and it'll be fine. So I wrong-footed them and said, okay, first day of this is you are going on a consumer safari. And I'd arranged for a long line of tuk-tuks in the compound outside the office, lined up like that. So you have to go with these people, and you have till midnight tonight to find out as much as you can about their lives, what matters to them, what keeps them up at night. This is sort of jobs to be done stuff. But then, you know, your world is sort of to do with money and technologies. How does that work for them? How does that fit into this bigger picture? And come back, and tomorrow we're going to spend the day describing the world of these people that we've got here. They're not all of your audience, but they are an audience that you... And so one of the guys came out who's in tears. Senior leader in this business in tears, says, I've never seen these people before. And that's not unusual. That's not just India that happens in with its caste structure. It happens in every culture. I've seen it in Australia. I've seen it in the US. I've seen it in the UK. I've seen it in France. I've seen it in Germany. People don't see the people they're supposed to be serving. Yeah. And I would try and find as many ways as possible to get you in an unfiltered way in contact with your customers, whatever you can do. And I used to say this to my teams in creative agencies. What is it that you can find to like about this audience? Find something you like, because human beings are amazing. Even the ones that you think are a bit of a dick, there's something they do that's amazing. What is it that they do that's amazing? Find that. Find the thing to connect. Because if you can connect with them empathetically, then you can build stuff that really makes their lives better. Otherwise, it's pure intellect, and that gets us nowhere.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you so much. Thank you. From my side, Mark, thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this conversation. Yeah.
It's been great. Thank you, Mark. And folks, we'll be following up with a podcast every month, getting great people like Mark to tell us their thoughts about life stages and what really matters to people. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for listening to What Matters to People. Subscribe, share, and join the conversation. Until next time.